Oh, we've got some good stuff to talk about in today's podcast conversation. I'm so glad to welcome Kay onto the show and to really dive into some meaty stuff like how the church in many ways has done a very crappy job in dealing with abuse allegations, how people assigned female at birth have been taught to really hate their bodies, how men have been taught to hate and be mistrustful of them, how anti LGBTQ theology kills and therefore cannot be from God, about the toxicity and bad fruit of gender roles within relationships. And yeah, so much stuff. I'm really glad to just open up these cans of worms and just throw them all over the place. That's what we do here. Let's jump in. Hi, Kay. Thank you so much for coming and being a guest on the Epic Kate Show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, man. It's like we've had so many awesome conversations. I've lost track of time. And you just have such a way with words and expressing, and I'm really glad for this chance. So thank you.
Thank you. That's so sweet.
Yeah, there's just so much to talk about, and some of it's kind of heavy, but the thing that I wanted to start with is the perception of being AFAB, assigned female at birth, and how relationships are supposed to work, and just like your perception of it, how it affected you, and yeah.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I think that I've been exploring that for the better part of a year now. Um, and how I think a lot of it for me came with the introduction to the LGBTQ plus community and language that I didn't have before. And the realization that like there are people out there who felt as I did about the gender that I'm assigned and also the body that I'm in. Um, and I think that it's an interesting thing to kind of like have the language now, and then go back and kind of like unpack what I felt as a child or as a teenager. I was just having this conversation with my friend yesterday, um, of how in the 90s, if you were assigned female at birth and weren't feminine, you were given the tomboy label. That was your label. And it was kind of like your ability to kind of like navigate more masculine presenting dress and like, and then there comes a time where that's no longer appropriate and you're expected to
you
like
just you just grow out of it, and you just
grow
accept
up.
that you're a girl and you should
Yeah,
like pink and makeup.
yeah, you have to grow up at some point, right?
Yeah. So were you a self-identified tomboy as a child?
Oh, definitely, definitely. My first day of high school, me and my best friend, who was assigned male at birth, dressed in the exact same outfit, and
On
he was
purpose?
so mad. No, no. I found this shirt in the guys section, and I thought it was really cool. It had some like sarcastic limerick on it, and I wore it with jeans and gym shoes, and he wore the exact same outfit, and he was so mad that he's turned his shirt inside out so we wouldn't match.
Did you get some grief from your family about dressing like that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think it was just kind of like a lot of pushback of like, why can't you just present more feminine? Why can't you just wear skirts? Why can't you just? It was a lot of grief, especially around holidays or major events, or especially around going to church.
Mm.
Um, and so I think for a lot of the day to day, it was like, look, you can dress in whatever you want, but on these days, you have to present more feminine. This is something you have to perform if
How
you're
did
going to
it
be in a
feel?
man.
How did it feel to wear a dress, and did they like put makeup on you too and stuff?
The makeup I was okay with. I think like there is a part of me that wanted to explore what that felt like. And I think that what I've come to understand is that I like the way people treated me when I dressed more
Mm.
feminine. I also thought I'm a very practical person. And I realized that not only people treated me better, and it made people around me happier and more comfortable with me. And so it was just like, oh, like this is a very practical thing. I can do this. I can put on this dress and it doesn't make me happy, but it makes my life easier. And that's what attracts me to presenting more feminine.
I have had this experience of walking through the mall and being invisible, like it's fine. And then my friend doing my hair and makeup, and suddenly guys talking to me.
Mhm.
Like, whoa, I'm
Yeah.
visible when I have this on.
Yeah. And I've experienced that, I think, in my 20s professionally as well, or of like people treating you with more respect and treating you as if you are more capable because you have makeup on.
Wow.
So whenever I had important meetings, I would joke to my coworkers that it was time to bring out my war paint. And that's how I viewed makeup. Yeah.
Wow. And how is your perception as a child and of how a relationship is supposed to work? I mean, obviously only between a male and a female, because
Oh,
yeah,
for sure.
everything else is
And
just evil.
the rest is just what, like, not me. Um, yeah, so men and women, this is fun. Relationships. Women are to be submissive. And I was taught that a woman of value would cook, clean, care for, bear children for her partner, that partner is the head of the household, and will guide her through life and make all of the decisions for her.
Because he's directly under God.
Correct.
Yeah.
And if you get a good one, he will take your advice into consideration. But the ultimate decision lies with them. Right, right. Like,
It's too kind.
man.
The bar is so low. It's
In hell.
Oh man. So what led you to deconstructing these thoughts of I have to do this to fit? I mean, I understand you probably still have to put on war paint in some cases.
Oh yeah.
But thoughts about it in general.
Yeah, I definitely default to like the safety of femininity sometimes. And not only the safety of femininity, but if it's like, if we're living in a binary and you're talking to people who understand a binary, if I have to pick a box, woman will do, like, no, not really, but fine. I understand that that's how you perceive me. I think like I'm one of those people that like hearing other people's stories were really impactful. And I think when it came to like sexuality, just like being alive and being on the internet and having somebody say like, oh, if you've thought about kissing a woman, maybe you're not straight. And I'm just like, no, like everyone has thought about that, you know? And it led to these conversations that I had with my cis het friends. And I was like, you have, right? Like you've met a woman and you're just like, yeah. And they're just like, no. And I talked to somebody who's quite older than me. And the word she used that I need to stop and think about this. She was like, never. I was like, never? Never have you ever, you've lived 50 something years, like you've never met a woman. And she was like, did you meet a woman? It was like one. So I think like at that point I was like, maybe I need to stop and kind of like really lean into some of those feelings.
And your pronouns on your screen are they, she.
Yeah.
So when did you adopt those pronouns and start to like, does it, and also a little side quest, how does it feel when people actually use they? Does it feel different?
Oh, it does. And I think I wasn't ready for that. I think I came from really like cisgendered heterosexual world, where there was a lot of like transphobic rhetoric around they thems, how unnecessary it was and stuff like that. And I'd been thinking about my gender for a while, and I was in a queer space and I was like, I'm just gonna try she, they. Like, let's just try someday. And people, and I loved it. It was just so, I don't know how to describe the feeling, but it brought me such joy to be referred to that way. It was a really like powerful moment, you know? And so over the last year, I went from she, her to she, they to they, she. And it's something that I consider kind of like very fluid, and something that I want to continue to explore.
Cool.
In part online, deconstructing gender happened the same way. And I also met trans people in real life, which was really impactful. I had this really close trans masculine friend, and we're always talking. And it's really affirming to kind of like be in conversation with him or to converse with him about these things, because I'm like, yes, I'm not alone. You know, the experiences that I had and the way that I interpreted them is not singular and it's not odd. And I think that having those conversations with queer people really helped me tease out a lot of this.
Like, I'm not wrong for what I wanted to wear in high school. And now it's like, I can't fit in this box.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a freedom, because not only, in the queer community, when you deconstruct like gender and presentation, right? What happens is like I can identify as a woman and still not have to perform femininity.
Yes.
I can identify as a woman and still use they them pronouns. It's okay.
We get to choose what it means, like how much of it is even real and how much of it is just social expectations. And
Right.
the social expectations of one country or even one state to another state are so different.
Yeah, absolutely.
But but there's a little extra layer of difficulty for you with your ethnicity, isn't there?
Yeah, I would say that like culturally, we have not, and although there are queer people who come from my ethnic background, and are proud queer people. Bad Bunny is where I'm from, and he is an ally to the LGBTQ plus community, and he has done great strides in kind of like normalizing men or people assigned male at birth painting their nails and being very expressive in their dress and the way that they present. And also he's done videos in which he has gone full drag. And still, he just got nominated for, I think, the Grammys Album of the Year, the first Spanish album ever in the history of the Grammys to be nominated for that. And so, he's doing such an excellent job of starting this conversation within our ethnicity. But yes, culturally, non-binary, queer, those are things that we don't talk about.
And there's also the layer of danger, that there's so much more danger for people of color to be queer.
Yeah, definitely. I think in inner cities, like the one that I live in, and if you go into the wrong neighborhood and you present a certain way, it does present a risk. And I'm fortunate to live in a big enough city where we have neighborhoods that provide, respite to queer people. And I'm very thankful for that.
So I wanted to switch gears a bit and go down a bit of a darker path. So maybe can trigger warning if you have trouble talking or hearing about sexual trauma and violence and survivorhood, then I will put a timestamp in here of what you can skip to. I wanted to talk about how churches in your experience have handled the victims of sexual violence.
Yeah, so I have been a part of two churches, and one as a child and one as an adult, who have handled the conversation about survivorship or dealing with people who have sexual trauma. And handled these things very, very differently. I think that in the first church, the church that I attended as a child, there was an attempt to surround and like what they would identify as like support victims of sexual assault, but also very much behind that support was the understanding that we get to decide what a victim is, right? And so there were situations in which victims had come forward about their abuse and or their assault and were questioned and not believed. Like that support was obviously not universal, or it was obviously contingent on certain factors, right? And so if you did not check those boxes of what a real victim looked like, right, or if your victimhood made other people uncomfortable, or your survivalship, made other people uncomfortable, then you were not going to receive that support. And in fact, we had a situation that became really a form of like public discussion on whether the person was telling the truth, on whether like they were lying, right? And not being honest about what happened.
And it's like, you're supposed to be feminine, but not so feminine that you are going to cause your brother in Christ to stumble. So it's what were you wearing and how were you acting? And are you sure you didn't bring this on with your womanly wiles?
Yeah, I think like as a child, I will say that it seemed perfectly normal for these conversations to happen, right? And even like a responsibility of a good adult in your life would be to look at your outfit and then rate how appropriate that outfit was or how much attention that outfit invited, right? As an adult, I have a very different perspective on how can you look at a child's body and in any way think that that would elicit or should elicit a response, or shouldn't, like, you know what I'm saying? How can you look at a child's body and police it in that way? I think it like really comes off as creepy to me as an adult. Like any adult that I would hear having that conversation now, I'd be like, oh, this is problematic, but you are the problem. And I think I had a conversation with someone who used to go to church with me to that church, and how like public and common the discussions of what young girls were wearing were, and to the point that some of those people grew up and never really recovered from that.
It totally just brings me back to what you were talking about. Come on, everybody's thought about kissing girls. Yeah. Come on, everybody's looked at a child's body and been attracted to it. Like, oh no, you're telling on yourself.
Yeah. Definitely.
You didn't mean to be telling on yourself because you thought everybody did it.
Right. And also I think that like having those conversations attracts and allows people who do look at children's bodies that way to be very comfortable and vocal about that, right? And to not take responsibility for that, project that responsibility onto a child because of what they're wearing or how they carry themselves or how friendly they are, right? And that's not the case. Like that's your responsibility as an adult to take, you know.
And so you said that you are also a survivor. Did you want to share anything about that and how that fits into your narrative?
Yeah, I think that sexual identity, gender identity, and survivorship are all different things, and they're not necessarily interconnected for everybody.
Real quick, I will just jump in and say, like, that's what I learned about gay people is, oh, they're gay because they were molested, and like, oh gosh.
Yeah.
Kill that with fire. Like
and I think like to be honest, like as a survivor navigating that narrative is really hard, because I think even now I struggle with how much of my discomfort around men is steeped in you're just queer and how much of that is steeped in maybe that's you've been triggered in some way. And also I have known so many women who have survived violence and have no problems dating, marrying, being in loving, committed relationship with men. And so it doesn't seem that there is a correlation, considering like only 10% of my generation identifies as LGBTQ. But a vast majority of people assigned female at birth have been sexually assaulted.
What is it, like 1 in 4?
Yeah. It's actually 1 in 4 as an adult. That does not count people who have been assaulted before adulthood. So that's just 18 and up.
Wow. So were you believed when did you talk about it? Was it a church situation where they is conjecture the right word? Where they conjectured about whether you deserved it or not or whatnot?
Yeah, I think so the first time that I disclosed any kind of sexual assault, it was pretty young, and I was not at this home church that I was talking about yet. I don't know. My parents always told me that they did believe me. And I want to give them that benefit of the doubt. But the police were not called until he left. He had taken some money and left after they confronted him. And other than a police report, like nothing else was done, right?
So it's like, it counted when money was involved, eh?
I don't know. It's just like a really weird, because we also don't talk about this in our culture, American culture and Latin culture or anything like that. So I don't know how much of that was like shame and how much of that was like, oh, she's telling us something and like we need to figure out what's happening, instead of like this reaction to just like be like, she told us something and it happened and we believe that. And so yeah, I think they found navigating the emotions that came up with realizing that your child has like survived something like this is really difficult for any parent. And my heart goes out to them, my parents at that time. And also as a child, I don't know if I felt like it was acknowledged or believed in a way. And I had to wrestle with that personally.
Did it affect, were you already aware of like purity culture teachings and things? So did you already feel the effect of that?
Oh yeah, like I was very much involved in the church from a very young age. I got saved at like 3. And so I was very conscientious of like the sinfulness that was being a survivor. And I think that even there were other instances in my life that could fall in the umbrella of like sexual assault that I had to unpack as an adult, because purity culture, like sexual assault looks a very specific way in that purity culture, right? And anything outside of that is questionable. And so if you aren't being like held down, right, was it assault? Or if you aren't being harmed, like was it assault? You know what I'm saying? And so it was just like, well, if it didn't, like if I didn't leave that situation with bruises, is it assault? Or was it that I just didn't say no loud enough? And so unpacking that as an adult, and thank you therapy, and thank God for therapy. But yeah, I mean, purity culture has real ramifications for people.
I remember a person saying like that they had been molested as a child, and then when they met their spouse and told them, they were like, but he was okay with it, he didn't hold it against me. Like, well, of course you didn't hold it against her, you were a child. Like the whole like, oh, but he was a virgin and so he should have had a virgin too. Like, don't
Oh
get me
yeah.
don't get me started, but I just have to say oh, hugs.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I mean, that it's so heavy, and I just want to tell all the survivors out there like that maybe you always need to hear it your whole life that it's not your fault. Maybe there's no
Yeah,
time when you don't need to hear it, like it's not
yeah.
your fault.
This is, I think this is a really good point. I think that we need to start saying that before people become survivors. I think they need to hear that before they become survivors. I think when you talk about anybody who has experienced or claimed to have experienced sexual assault, there's a person in the room who is going to go on and experience sexual assault. And when they do, they don't need to hear, oh, well, you're the exception, but we talk about everybody else this way, right? They need to know from the jump that we as a culture believe women, that we believe anybody who has been sexually assaulted, that we support them, that it is not their fault, right? That there's nothing, we understand as a society that there's nothing that we can do to deter these things, right? And that it is an unfair act of violence against whoever it is against.
Absolutely. And then there was a thing that we talked about earlier that is fitting to the conversation, that there was a person in your life who had a particular reaction to some allegations against another person in your life. I'm keeping it vague so that nobody's getting in trouble.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I
what
remember,
what's noteworthy about that reaction to the allegations?
yeah, I think that sexual assault is not something that we talk about often. It's really uncomfortable. And I think that not talking about them and not being educated on sexual assault and the ramification of sexual assault leads people to say things that are just biased and incorrect. And I was during one of the instances at my church, we were having, the church in itself was having a discussion about this person who had come forward about abuse. I heard someone say that they didn't believe the allegation because of the behavior of the survivor, right? And so it's like, if she had experienced that assault, she should act like this, right? And I think that there's some scary things about survivorship, right? That, you know, some survivors get assaulted and become hypersexualized. Some survivors get assaulted, and the only way that they can feel pleasure is by recalling the assault or replaying the assault, right? And those are perfectly normal reactions to being assaulted. And I think that the lack of education and the ignorance, the reaction is like, oh, well, if that person is going and having a lot of sex, obviously they don't have a problem with having had been assaulted. And that's not true. Evidence shows us that that's the opposite of true, right? And so, and which puts kids and also survivors at higher risks of being trafficked, right? After having experienced that kind of assault. So I think that, yeah, I think that as a survivor, to continue to hear that kind of like underlying, if you are a survivor, you have to act this way. And if you stray from this narrative, I no longer believe you. It's a really, really scary thing. What I would add to that is understanding the high rates on which both people assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth in this country experience sexual assault. Like, we should be doing a lot of the groundwork as adults to have these conversations within our families and within our communities to be able to catch these youth when it happens, and to catch whoever adults when it happens as well.
And what you were saying, that when we have these conversations, to bear in mind the people who will be hurt, and who've already been hurt but never told anyone, it made me think about how there are so many more queer people out there than are out of the closet, and all the sermons about how they're horrible people, they're hearing that too, and it's just pushing them further and further back into self-loathing, and oh, it breaks my heart.
It does. And I just want to highlight that they just don't hear, right, like whoever pastor being like, they're an abomination, right? They hear their relatives call that guy a man of God and a prophet, right? And not hearing that correction come and that rejection of that belief, right? That we understand as human beings, right? That God's love is encompassing, right? God's love does not abandon. Like if you read Corinthians where it says love is, it does not say love leaves you high and dry when you do not perform whatever it is that I want you to do, right?
There's nothing that can separate you.
Right. And so a theology, understanding that for me, because when I came out, I was like, well, maybe for Jesus, you know what I mean? I could just not. I can just abstain for Jesus.
People hear these damaging messages and they hate who they are. How do you get into the sexual liberation and acceptance of who you are and what has happened?
I think that for me, what really shifted, I have a deep belief that God brings life, right? And understanding that the theology of homosexuality being a sin brings death, right? You have higher rates of suicide, you have, higher suicide attempt, more mental health struggles in the sense of like not wanting to be alive, right? And I think that if you have a theology that we can quantify causes harm and causes people to no longer live, I think knowing that God is life and God is love, we can all agree that that does not come from him, right? And I think that if you can hold that God is life and his theology kills, I think what you have to do in that moment is dehumanize the people that it costs their life, right? And so you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you're somebody who believes that God is a good theology brings life, then you have to agree that the theology of homosexuality being a sin does not do that. And so I think that really theologically that is what got me. Like people argue about like what the original translation said, like none of that could convince me. When I stepped back and realized when I, as a queer person coming out, was like, should I be alive? Or, you know what I'm saying? Like, and that real moment of, if this is the theology that I've been taught, maybe it's just wrong. And there is sexual liberation in the Bible. Sexual liberation is very biblical. I don't know if you've ever read like Song of Solomon. A few times. Spicy stuff. And David, who had like 100,000 wives and like would just see someone and be like, bring her over and I'm going to be with her because she's so beautiful. Oh my gosh, I understand that. But yes, sexual liberation was for the wealthy, was for the few, but it was biblical and it was shined upon as God's will, right? And something that brought pleasure to God, to see David marry somebody and be happy with them and enjoy them and delight himself in them, and his concubines and his wives and some other people's wives. Jesus was mad about that one though. But yeah, sexual liberation is a part of the Christian ethos. And that in itself is liberating.
I wanted to hear about how, with all these things we talked about in the beginning of the expectations of relationships, how is that different in a queer relationship?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that And like, if I remember my brain when I was, which was like only a couple years ago, when I was dating men, I think, are you okay? I think I was really looking for someone where it would feel right to submit to that person, right? I was looking for somebody who would tell me what to do in life. And I could never find that. And I understand now that's because that's not what I wanted. It was what I told I should be wanted. What I was told I should want. And I think that in queer relationships, everything is on the table all of a sudden. Like there's no assumption of roles. Like, and then you get to figure out like what works for you. How are you best at being a partner, right? Like, are you the kind of person that wants to what do you want to provide to your partner and what do you want your partner to provide for you? And when you walk away from heteronormativity, where some of those boxes are really filled in, the man should provide, the woman should cook and clean, this is what we offer to each other as men and women, you get to like open up this whole world of like, but what if none of that mattered? Who are you and what do you need? And like, that's such a powerful, like, it's a powerful moment to be like, this is what I've been told all of my life that I will get. And I have to live with that. To walking away from that and being like, but what do I need? More importantly, like, what do I want? And I enjoy that so much, to negotiate that with a partner, to like realize new things about myself of, I like to provide this. I like to get this, right? I like to buy my partner flowers. That's fun for me. I don't know if I would have done that as a heterosexual person.
It's like, I just shudder at words like submitting, like, because of how much damage it's done and all that jazz. But like, I've been married for 12 years. What is time? And we don't have this kind of relationship. Like, there's times when I'm more of the dude and he's more of the girl, in the classic sense of dealing with emotions and dealing with domestic chores and all of these things. Like, straight relationships don't have to be all messed up with patriarchy and misogyny.
And I think that like, yeah, and I think that if one thing that we can look at the Christian way of like viewing, or even the heteronormative way of viewing relationships, and look at the divorce rates and say, that doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah, it's like, oh, people are like, oh, back in the day, people stayed together. Yeah, because she couldn't get a credit card.
Yeah,
like,
or have a bank account, or
like, she was literally stuck.
Yeah, and I think that people find change intimidating, but liberation is a right word to use when we talk about sexual liberation or like gender liberation, because it opens things up for everyone to reimagine what they're offered in their relationships. Like, this is not a something that cannot be unpacked in a heterosexual relationship. If you are somebody who identifies as a woman and you're not getting what you need from your partner, but that's what society is telling you should want, you can decide, you know what? No, I want something different, and I want to unpack what that means for me. And men can too, or people who identify as men can too. They can say, I don't want to be the provider. I want to be a stay-at-home dad. That's where I want to nurture my children and spend all my time with them.
Dude.
Amazing.
My husband is so much more nurturing than I was in the beginning. Like, I think I had some postpartum depression. I just was like, after they were done nursing, like, get them off of me.
Yeah.
I want to sweep the freaking floor. I want to do dishes. Just give me a chance to have my body to myself for a minute. Morton was so amazing, just being so happy to cuddle them for hours and hours on end. Like,
that is amazing.
So much more nurturing.
Yeah, and in some societies that would have been frowned upon. I know you guys live in a society which, like, there's paid paternal leave, right?
There's what?
Paid paternal leave.
Yeah.
So like,
both partners get a good amount of time off.
right. And so like, I know in our society, it would be like, oh, you have to go back to work because she's not working. And so like, that's your role in this, is to not be nurturing, but to be a provider. And how sad is that for partners who identify as men or are assigned male at birth to not have that opportunity?
Yeah. Ugh, toxic gender roles. Don't get me started. What would you say to people struggling to accept their queerness, their view of the gender that they're looking out into the world from, and they're carrying around guilt and shame and whatever else?
Yeah, I think that the shame that I carried was a shame that came from a lack of self-compassion and self-love, right?
Mm.
It was a place that in order to receive God's love, I had to check these boxes. I had to live my life a certain way. And it's so funny because even like all of these years later, like Paul talks about this and he's not my favorite, okay?
Don't get me started on Paul either. Oh, Paul.
But I will give him credit in this. He says time and time again that the law is done. He's very, very clear. He says, if you are going to take one law, one rule, and measure somebody's faith by that, then all the laws must apply. And if all the laws apply, you cannot be saved because you are imperfect. Or you can step into the love and grace that God has, right? And envelop yourself in that. What he says is like, sin, no sin, doesn't really matter, right? Love is what matters. God's love for us that encompasses us. And I think that if I could go back in time and sit with myself, I would say, you are worthy of love just the way you are. You don't have to change to be worthy of God's love. His love encompasses you exactly where you're at. And you have to show some of that self-love and self-compassion to yourself. And not expect you as a queer person to be straight. Like a pineapple tree, there's no such thing as pineapple tree. Like an apple tree cannot expect to itself to bear pineapples or strawberries, right? Because it isn't a thing. It doesn't happen, right? And you're not straight, and that's okay. Like Jesus can handle that. He's a big boy. And I promise you, he can look at you and be like, great, awesome, love you, next.
Yeah. You talked earlier about mourning that identity of the Christian person and then the identity of the gay person, of like, I have to pick one of those.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, and I still feel that way most days. I think that as a queer person of color, there's not, I haven't found any space in which I'm fully accepted in my identity. And to go through life believing in a God whose people cannot affirm you in your fullness, it is a heavy and weighty thing. And so there is a lot of mourning there and understanding that, like, because of who you are, not because of something that you did, and not that something that you did should exempt you, right? But because of who you are, you cannot access the fullness of the body of Christ, right? You cannot have a place to mourn things or collectively create community within your faith because they do not accept you. And yeah, that's what I mourn most of all, the sense of community and belonging and a sense of shared understanding of God's love for me.
Well, let me just tell you and anyone else watching, there is an online Zoom church called Chosen Family Church. And it's an awesome, fully accepting space. It's a queer, non-binary, autistic pastor, Pastor Jeff, and they're awesome. They sometimes wear like black lipstick and shiny purple eyeshadow, and I'm like, oh yes, I am here for this.
That's amazing.
I know. So I'm going to put the link for that down below in the description. It's a real community that is fully affirming.
Amazing.
Yeah. They meet every other Sunday, but sorry, I didn't mean to jump in over you.
No, it's okay. Yeah, so just like living with that is, yeah, it's just hard. But at the same time, I think I just met for Friendsgiving yesterday with 11 other queer people. And to think back to what my life was like, pretending that I wasn't who I was, right? Like, it's heavy either way, and you just have to do the best that we can. But what we can do is shape the church to be better. I can't be different. I tried dating men for a very, very long time. It just came out like a little more than a year ago. But we can change the church to become more accepting, and it doesn't endanger anyone's faith, to anyone's salvation, to make God's love deeper and wider and more encompassing, right? Like, all the straight people will still go to heaven, right? If we also make this inclusive to queer people.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to say?
I think navigating sexuality is especially difficult for people assigned female at birth and people who are perceived as women for their younger years, and the weight that we put on those individuals and those persons is almost too much to bear.
Like, I remember in a way kind of feeling not like on purpose, but feeling like better than curvier women because I don't really have as much to tempt the men folk with. I was a stick back in the day. I'm not a stick any longer.
That baby made sure of that.
But yeah, it's really ingrained.
It is really ingrained. And I think like it's just, you make up a really good point of like how we're taught to hate our bodies from a very young age, or to hate what our bodies could have been, and to in essence hate femininity and hate and I don't know if I want to equate femininity with like curviness, because there are some people who are not feminine and not people assigned are not women and are curvy, but also like to hate something so much is a little scary. And then to train men in the Christian church to hate women's bodies and to have contempt for a woman's body, and then be like, here's a woman that you get to be in charge of, and they can't question you and they have to submit to you, is a very scary thing.
Bounce the eyes. Don't ever be alone, even in a restaurant with a person of the opposite sex. Billy Graham rule, was it? Like,
always have the door open. Like,
yeah,
that's so, and how it trains women to view other women as a threat, and always a threat, instead of acknowledging that the threat is coming from the person who would not be able to be in a room with these people.
Telling on themselves again. Telling on themselves.
Back something, because I promise you, I've been in a room with a lot of queer people, and queer people who love women don't have conversations like that, right? Like, they're not. I've been to a lot of queer space. Like, I'm not uncomfortable to be in the bathroom with anyone in my community, almost anyone in my community, and I will not say the same for non-queer spaces.
Well, I feel like we could just talk for hours and hours and hours, and so I should probably just call it. But I want to thank you so much for being here, and I want to thank you for listening to this conversation. If you want to hear more about this, if you'd like to like put your thoughts and questions down below in the comments so we can keep this conversation going, because it's so important to have this conversation and these conversations, and not let it just be a, oh, that's interesting, but no, how can we make this world better, dang it. Yeah, so thank you so much, Kay.
Thank you.
The way that I end my conversations is I give hugs.
Thank you, Katie.
Okay, bye. If you're new to my channel, I also do vlogs, and I just share from an authentic place in my heart and share beauty and happy memories, and I'd love for you to check that out as well. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Please like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Hugs!